The Rambler Network.
I've been listening to Yellowcard lately, and they have a song called Bedroom Posters. Great song. It's from their 2025 album Better Days. In 2026, uh, this year that I'm recording this, Yellowcard released a new version of that song featuring Joel and Benji Madden from Good Charlotte. Except that's not what the title says. The title says Bedroom Posters featuring Good Charlotte. And that bothers me. Joel Madden is the lead singer of Good Charlotte. Joel Madden is a member of Good Charlotte. Joel Madden is one of the most recognizable parts of Good Charlotte, but Joel Madden is not Good Charlotte. If Joel Madden walks into a room by himself, Good Charlotte has not entered the room. Joel Madden has entered the room. This seems like a very simple distinction, and I know this because we've already figured out how to credit this exact situation. Just Give Me a Reason by Pink features Nate Ruess. Nate Ruess was the lead singer of Fun. And I specifically remember that song used to be listed as featuring Nate Ruess of Fun. At some point, they apparently dropped the of Fun part because now it's just featuring Nate Ruess, which is fine. In fact, I think that's better. Nate Ruess sang on the song, so Nate Ruess gets the credit. It doesn't say Pink featuring Fun because Fun didn't sing Just Give Me a Reason. Nate Ruess did. So I thought I had a very simple rule. If one member of a band appears on your song, you credit the member, not the band. There, problem solved. Episode over. Except, no. Because then I thought about Owl City. If you have Adam Young on your song, could you say featuring Owl City? Yeah, you could. Because Adam Young is Owl City. Owl City sounds like a band name. It looks like a band name. If you didn't know anything about Owl City and somebody told you it was 4 guys from Minnesota, you'd probably believe them. But Owl City is Adam Young's musical project. There are touring musicians and collaborators, obviously, but the identity of Owl City is Adam Young. So if Adam Young appears on your song and you credit Owl City, I'm not going to complain. Which immediately breaks my rule, because now apparently sometimes a person can be a band. Okay, new rule. If the band is actually just a stage name for one person, then you can credit the band. Five for Fighting. Sounds like a band. It's just John and Jurassic. So if somebody collaborates with John and Jurassic and says, featuring Five for Fighting, sure, that works. We've solved it again. Except Electric Light Orchestra. Now we have a different problem. Electric Light Orchestra was absolutely a band. It wasn't Jeff Lynne sitting alone in a room calling himself Electric Light Orchestra. There were other people in ELO. Roy Wood was there at the beginning. Bev Bevan was there. Richard Tandy. There have been a lot of people involved with ELO over the years, but eventually ELO became so closely identified with Jeff Lynne that the modern incarnation is literally called Jeff Lynne's ELO. So if Jeff Lynne appeared on someone's song and they said featuring the Electric Light Orchestra, would I accept that? Yeah, probably. But why? Jeff Lynne is one person. Electric Light Orchestra was a band. So now apparently a band can begin as a band and through some mysterious process of musical mitosis, in reverse, gradually collapse into one human being. Which means my second rule doesn't work either. So maybe the question isn't whether something is technically a band. Maybe the question is, does the identity of the musical act belong to a specific person? Adam Young is Owl City. John Andrasik is Five for Fighting. At this point, Jeff Lynne essentially is ELO. Joel Madden is Good Charlotte? No, absolutely not. I have somehow constructed an increasingly complicated philosophical framework and arrived back at exactly where I started. Joel Madden is in Good Charlotte. He is not Good Charlotte. Benji Madden exists. Billy Martin, Paul Thomas exist. These are not imaginary friends Joel created to make his album photos look more interesting. Good Charlotte is a group of people. So maybe here's a test. If the person leaves, does the musical act cease to exist? Adam Young leaves Owl City. There's no Owl City. Because who is he leaving? Himself? I regret to announce that after creative differences with myself, I have decided to leave Owl City. I wish myself the best in all future endeavors. That doesn't work. John Androsik quits Five for Fighting. Congratulations! Five for Fighting has ceased to exist. Jeff Lynne quits Jeff Lynne's ELO. I feel like the remaining members might have a slight branding problem. But Joel Madden could theoretically quit Good Charlotte. It would be a massive change. They need another singer. Maybe the band wouldn't want to continue without him. But conceptually, he can leave something because The Thing and Joel Madden are separate entities. Okay, there. That's the rule. If the artist can quit the band, the artist is not the band. Done. Solved. Except then I thought about Led Zeppelin. And this is where everything completely falls apart. John Bonham died in 1980. Led Zeppelin had 4 members: Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, John Paul Jones, and John Bonham. After Bonham died, the remaining 3 decided they couldn't continue as Led Zeppelin. They released a statement essentially saying that the loss of their friend and the deep sense of undivided harmony between the 4 of them meant they could not continue as they were. Led Zeppelin was over. And I think most people understand that. They've reunited for occasional performances, but Led Zeppelin didn't just hire a new drummer and release another studio album. Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, John Paul Jones, they continued making music. The individual people still exist as musicians, but the entity called Led Zeppelin did not. So apparently John Bonham was essential to Led Zeppelin. Without John Bonham, no Led Zeppelin. Which raises an interesting question. Was John Bonham Led Zeppelin? No, obviously not. If John Bonham had played drums on someone else's song in 1978, the title wouldn't have been featuring Led Zeppelin. It would have said featuring John Bonham. So now we have this incredibly strange distinction. John Bonham was not Zeppelin, but Led Zeppelin was not Led Zeppelin without John Bonham. Those two statements are both true. A person can be essential to the identity of a group without individually possessing the identity of the group. Which sounds obvious when you say it that way, but unfortunately, I am now several layers deep into this metaphysics of band names, and there's no escape. And Led Zeppelin gives us one answer to what happens when an essential member dies. The band dies too. But then there's Lynyrd Skynyrd. In 1977, Lynyrd Skynyrd's plane crashed. Ronnie Van Zant, Steve Gaines, and Cassie Gaines died. Their assistant road manager, Dean Kilpatrick, also died. The other members were seriously injured. It was an absolutely horrific tragedy, and the band stopped. Which makes sense. But about 10 years later, the surviving members reunited for a tribute tour. Ronnie Van Zant's younger brother, Johnny, became the singer. Eventually, Lynyrd Skynyrd continued as Lynyrd Skynyrd. So Led Zeppelin loses one of 4 members and says, "We cannot be Led Zeppelin anymore." Lynyrd Skynyrd suffers a catastrophic plane crash, loses multiple people, including its lead singer and principal lyricist, and eventually says, "We can." Neither one is wrong. And that destroys another possible rule. Because apparently we can't establish band identity mathematically. We can't say if you retained 75% of the original lineup, you are still the band, because Led Zeppelin retained 75% and stopped. We can't say if you lose your lead singer, you're no longer the band, because Lynyrd Skynyrd continued. AC/DC continued after Bon Scott died. Queen has toured with Adam Lambert. Journey has had multiple lead singers. Van Halen changed lead singers, changed back, changed again, changed back again. So there is no percentage. Apparently, you can't put a band on a scale and determine whether it still contains enough band units to legally qualify as itself. Which brings us to Fleetwood Mac. And Fleetwood Mac is where this entire question boards the ship of Theseus and sails directly into a rogue wave. The ship of Theseus is an old philosophical thought experiment. Imagine you have a ship. Over time, boards rot and you replace them. Eventually, every original piece of the ship has been replaced. Is this still the same ship? And if not, at what exact board did it stop being the original ship? If you took all the original boards and put them back together, is it the same ship? Now, apply that to Fleetwood Mac. Fleetwood Mac was formed in 1967, and if you're primarily familiar with the enormously successful version of Fleetwood Mac from the 70s, you might immediately think of Stevie Nicks, Lindsey Buckingham, and Christine McVie. Except Stevie Nicks wasn't an original member. Lindsey Buckingham wasn't an original member. Christine McVie wasn't an original member either, but she did become part of the band earlier than the other two. Peter Green was an original member. Jeremy Spencer was an original member. But they left. Danny Kerwin joined, he left. Bob Welch joined, he left. There was an entire pre-Rumors history of Fleetwood Mac that a huge portion of the general public barely associates with what they think of as Fleetwood Mac. Eventually, Buckingham and Nicks joined. That lineup becomes gigantic. Then people leave. Then people return. Then people leave again. Christian V retires, later returns, and eventually dies. Lindsey Buckingham was fired. Stevie Nicks remained. And through all of this, there are Mick Fleetwood and John McVie, which is particularly funny because the band is literally called Fleetwood Mac. Fleetwood Mac. Mick Fleetwood, John McVie. So you'd think this is the easiest possible case. If anybody can individually represent Fleetwood Mac, surely it's one of the two people whose names make up the name Fleetwood Mac. Except no. If Mick Fleetwood played drums on someone's song, you wouldn't say featuring Fleetwood Mac. You'd say featuring Mick Fleetwood. Even though Fleetwood Mac is partially named after him, Mick Fleetwood can walk into a room and Fleetwood Mac still hasn't entered the room, which gives us the opposite of Owl City. Adam Young walks into a room. Is Owl City there? Yes. Mick Fleetwood walked into a room. Is Fleetwood Mac there? No. Are you sure? Yes. But Fleetwood is literally standing right here. Doesn't matter. We're missing the Mac. So maybe we need an empty room test. One person enters an empty recording studio. Has the musical act arrived? Adam Young enters. Owl City has arrived. John Androstic enters. Five for Fighting has arrived. Jeff Lynne enters. Modern ELO? I'll allow it. Joel Madden enters. Has Good Charlotte entered? No. 1/4 of Good Charlotte has arrived. Well, depending on which lineup we're counting. And now we're back to percentages. Okay, different test. The simultaneous existence test. Can the person and the band exist in two different places at the same time? Joel Madden could theoretically be doing a solo event in Los Angeles while the other members of Good Charlotte are in New York. Joel Madden is in Los Angeles. Good Charlotte's other members are in New York. Now, can they actually perform as Good Charlotte without Joel? Maybe not. But the point is, Joel Madden and the rest of Good Charlotte are physically separable because they are different people. Adam Young cannot be in Los Angeles while Owl City is performing in New York, unless someone else is performing under the Owl City name, at which point we're going to need lawyers or cloning, and I don't think I want to introduce cloning into this episode. Because there's another problem. What happens when a band has no original members left? This actually happens. Bands can survive for decades. Somebody quits, they're replaced. Someone else retires, they're replaced. Somebody dies, they're replaced. And eventually you can reach a point where none of the people who currently performing under the band's name were there at the beginning. None of the original members of Quiet Riot are in the current lineup. Mick Jones is technically still officially in Foreigner, but due to his health, he no longer tours. He just owns the rights to the name. Victor Willis, the last founder of Village People, passed away on the 30th of June, 2026. But the lineup isn't even remotely the same as it started. If you look at the Wikipedia, there's a very long list of past members. We generally accept that gradual continuity is important. Let's say a fictional band called the Wombats of Despair has 4 members: Gary, Steve, Larry, and other Steve. Gary quits. They replace Gary with Kevin. Still, the Wombats of Despair. Steve retires. They replace Steve with Mark. Still, the Wombats of Despair. Larry dies. They replace Larry with Robert. Still, the Wombats of Despair. Other Steve leaves after an argument over publishing rights and an incident involving a Panera Bread. They replace Other Steve with Craig. Now the band is Kevin, Mark, Robert, and Craig. None of them were in the Wombats of Despair when the band started. But because every replacement happened while the band continued to exist, we accept Kevin, Mark, Robert, and Craig as the Wombats of Despair. But if Kevin, Mark, Robert, and Craig had independently met at a Panera Bread last Tuesday and said, "Hey, let's start a Wombats of Despair cover band," they would not be the Wombats of Despair. Same four people, same songs, same instruments, different chain of custody. So, apparently a band is not merely a collection of musicians. It has continuity. The identity passes from lineup to lineup, like a musical sourdough starter. As long as somebody keeps feeding it, apparently the organism survives. Which means a band might be less an object and more like an institution. The New York Yankees aren't defined by the original Yankees lineup. A theater company isn't necessarily defined by its founding actors. A corporation can outlive every person who worked there when it was created. So maybe Good Charlotte isn't just the collective name for Joel, Benji, Benny, and Paul. Maybe Good Charlotte is an institution that those people currently constitute. Except that seems absurdly grandiose. Good Charlotte made the anthem. We're not discussing the Roman Senate. And this leads to another problem. What happens if the institution splits? Because bands have had legal fights over who gets to use the name. And that's where philosophy suddenly crashes into the trademark law. Imagine our fictional Wombats of Despair break up. Kevin and Mark start touring as the Wombats of Despair. Robert and Craig also start touring as the Wombats of Despair. Now there are two Wombats of Despair. Which one is the real band? Whichever one has more members? Whichever one has the singer? Whichever one has the founding member? Remember, we already established there are no longer any founding members of Wombats of Despair left. So, is it down to whichever one the fans accept? Whichever one owns the trademark? Suddenly, the answer to the ancient philosophical question, what constitutes identity, is please refer to paragraph 7, subsection C of the licensing agreement. And I hate that. But it also means a band might be a legal entity. Except that's not even enough either. Because if somebody legally bought the rights to the name Led Zeppelin tomorrow, hired 4 musicians who had never met Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, John Paul Jones, or even John Bonham, and released a new album, would we all go, yep, new Led Zeppelin album? No, we lose our minds. So legal ownership doesn't necessarily create artistic legitimacy, which means the band's identity exists partly in the musicians, partly in the history, partly in continuity, partly in audience acceptance, partly in the attentions of the members, partly in the brand, partly in the repertoire, partly in the legal rights, and apparently partly in vibes. Oh, we've arrived at vibes. Thousands of years of philosophy have led us here. What is a band? Vibes. But even that doesn't solve this problem, because let's take Freddie Mercury. Freddie Mercury was so central to Queen that for many people, Freddie is the first person they picture when they hear the word Queen. But Freddie Mercury was not Queen. Brian May, Roger Moore, John Deacon, and Freddie Mercury was Queen, collectively. But Freddie Mercury by himself was Freddie Mercury. If Freddie Mercury guest sang in somebody's song in 1985, you would credit Freddie Mercury. You would not credit Queen. And yet, after Freddie Mercury died, Queen's identity became this enormously complicated question. John Deacon eventually retired. Brian May and Roger Taylor continued performing as Queen with other vocalists, most notably Adam Lambert, under the billing Queen plus Adam Lambert, which is actually a fascinating solution. Because that plus sign is doing an unbelievable amount of philosophical labor. Queen plus Adam Lambert. That says, this is Queen. Adam Lambert is performing with Queen. Adam Lambert is not Freddie Mercury. Adam Lambert is not retroactively absorbed into Queen's history. Nobody is pretending the classic lineup was magically regenerated. It's Queen plus Adam Lambert. That plus sign is basically a tiny legal disclaimer. And now punctuation is involved. Fantastic. We're making progress. So let's go back to collaborations. Slash appears on your song. Do you say featuring Guns N' Roses? No, you say Slash. Stevie Nicks appears on your song. Do you say featuring Fleetwood Mac? No, you say Stevie Nicks. Paul McCartney appears on your song. Do you say featuring the Beatles or Wings? Absolutely not. Imagine that. You release a song tomorrow, The Wombats of Despair, featuring the Beatles. I press play. Paul McCartney sings one verse. Excuse me, where's Ringo? And I have several more questions that are going to be considerably harder to answer. But that's the absurdity. Paul McCartney is not the Beatles. Paul McCartney was essential to the Beatles. John Lennon was essential to the Beatles. George Harrison and Ringo Starr were essential to the Beatles. But none of them individually was the Beatles. And the group stopped existing as an active band in 1970, even though all 4 members were still alive. Which gives us another category. We don't even need death. Sometimes a band ceases to exist because the members collectively decide the band no longer exists. The components remain, the entity disappears. This is getting dangerously close to asking whether a sandwich continues to exist as you separate the ingredients. The Beatles broke up. We had John, Paul, George, and Ringo. We did not have 4 Beatles. Well, I mean, we had 4 Beatles in the historical sense, but we did not have 4 The Beatles. I hate everything about that sentence. And now I realize there's another distinction. Membership can survive the band. We still call Paul McCartney a Beatle. We still call Ringo Starr a Beatle. But that doesn't mean either person individually becomes the Beatles. So a person can remain a member of a group that no longer actively exists. Apparently, band membership can be historical. So let's establish what we've learned. A person can be part of a band, essential to a band, the sole permanent identity behind an act, or can inherit leadership of a band. A band can survive the death of its singer, decide it cannot survive the death of its drummer, survive the replacement of every original member, break up while every member is still alive, reunite, split into competing versions, or transform it from a traditional group into essentially one person's project. A solo artist can use a name that sounds like a band and use a name derived from individual members. And Mick Fleetwood could be standing right in front of me, and Fleetwood Mac would still not be present. So I think we need to formalize this. I am proposing the Rambling Rambler Musical Entity Classification System. The RRMECS. RRMECS. That acronym is terrible. We're keeping it. Category 1. The individual. Example. Joe Madden. A human being. Simple. Category 2. The collective band. Example. Good Charlotte. Multiple people whose combined musical identity forms the group. Category 3. The pseudo-band. A word I just invented. Example. Owl City, or Fight for Fighting. A musical identity that grammatically or aesthetically behaves like a band name but fundamentally refers to one primary individual. Category 4. The evolved pseudo-band. Example. Modern ELO. An act that originated as a genuine collective but gradually became so identified with one person that the boundaries between individual and band identity became blurry. Category 5. The Theseus Band. Example. Fleetwood Mac. A group whose lineup has changed so dramatically over time that determining which lineup constitutes the real band requires historical context. Category 6. The Sacred Configuration. Example, Led Zeppelin, a group whose surviving members determined that removing one essential component destroys the identity of the whole. Category 7. The Continuity Band. Example, Lynyrd Skynyrd, a group that experiences enormous personal loss but maintains or later restores the band identity through continuity, legacy, or replacement. Category 8. the posthumously altered collective. Example, Queen. The defining member dies, surviving members continue under some version of the identity, and everybody spends the next several decades arguing about whether it counts. Category 9, the dormant collective. Example, the Beatles. The individual members remain identifiable with the historical group, even though the active collective ceases to function. Category 10, the Wombat of Despair. I forgot why I invented them. I think there was a Panera Bread involved. Now I want Panera. Anyway, now we can finally develop a test for whether it's appropriate to credit an entire band when only one person appears on your song. Question 1. Is the credited act literally the performing individual's stage or project name? If yes, band style credit permitted. Question 2. Is the individual effectively the sole creative identity of the act? If yes, permitted. Question 3. Did multiple actual members of the band participate? If yes, maybe credit the band. Question 4. Did only one member of the genuine collective participate? If yes, credit the person. Question 5. Is the person Mick Fleetwood? Do not be fooled by the name. It's still Mick Fleetwood. Question 6. Is the band Fleetwood Mac? Clear your afternoon. Question 7. Has the group undergone Question 7. Has the band undergone sufficient personal turnover to invoke the ship of Theseus? Consult a philosopher. Question 8. Is there an active trademark dispute? Consult an attorney. Question 9. Are there currently 2 touring versions of the same band? Consult multiple attorneys. Question 10. Is the artist dead? This has somehow not simplified anything. Question 11. Is Adam Young involved? It's Owl City. Question 12. Is it Joel Madden by himself? It's Joel Madden. And I think that's ultimately what bothers me about bedroom posters, because featuring Good Charlotte doesn't merely tell me who Joel Madden is associated with. It identifies the artist as Good Charlotte. Those aren't the same statement. Featuring Joel Madden of Good Charlotte is perfect. It tells you exactly who performed and gives you the band affiliation for people who might recognize the band faster than Joel's name. Featuring Joel Madden is perfect also. He is Joe Madden. He has our name. It's right there. We've had it the entire time. He was Joel Madden before Good Charlotte, and he'll be Joel Madden if he ever leaves Good Charlotte. But featuring Good Charlotte implies that Good Charlotte collaborated with Yellowcard. And if the only member of Good Charlotte actually featured on the recording is Joel Madden, then Good Charlotte didn't collaborate with Yellowcard. Joel Madden collaborated with Yellowcard. Okay, Good Charlotte has co-headlined with Yellowcard in the past, and they've worked together, but in this specific instance, they did not. And I realize that most people do not care about this, that nobody is listening to bedroom posters featuring Good Charlotte, throwing their headphones across the room like Jordan Howlett throwing his glasses, yelling, "This credit fails the simultaneous existence test!" Nobody is demanding that Spotify implement the RRMex. Still a crappy acronym. Nobody needs a ship of Theseus analysis before listening to Yellowcard. I understand that. But once I noticed it, I started thinking about it. And once I started thinking about it, we ended up with Led Zeppelin and Lynyrd Skynyrd and Fleetwood Mac and ELO and Queen and the Beatles and Owl City and Five for Fighting and a fictional band called the Wombats of Despair who may or may not have broken up out of Panera Bread. We have established that the person can be necessary for a band without being the band. A band can exist without its original members. The band's original members can exist without the band. A solo artist can be a band. A band can become functionally a solo artist. And a band's name can contain your literal surname and you still not personally constitute the band. All of this to say, Good Charlotte didn't sing bedroom posters. Joel Madden did.
The Rambler Network.